An ex-soldier helped an injured dog, not knowing it would lead him to his soulmate. That's what Ethan Morgan told himself every morning now. A reminder of how life's most broken roads sometimes led to unexpected destinations. 3 years ago, he wouldn't have believed it possible. Back then, the only faithful companion he had was the darkness that followed him home from Afghanistan. The apartment walls seemed to close in on him that December morning. Ethan's fingers trembled slightly as he poured his coffee. The slight shake, a permanent souvenir from the explosion that had ended his military career. Outside, Boston wore its winter coat, harsh, unforgiving, much like the memories that still ambushed him in the quiet hours. He caught his reflection in the window glass. Hollow eyes, the scar running along his jawline, dark hair grown too long. At 32, he looked a decade older. Sleep had become a luxury he could rarely afford. Not with the nightmares standing guard. Just another day, he muttered, a mantra that had replaced the military cadences that once structured his life. His therapist called it progress, that he had a job now, that he left his apartment 5 days a week to work security at the public library downtown. Progress felt like such a small word for the monumental effort it took to exist among people again, to feel their eyes on his scar, to answer their casual questions about his service with practiced deflections. The cold bit into his face as he stepped outside, the wind tunneling between apartment buildings. Ethan pulled his collar higher, hunched his shoulders. 6 blocks to the train station. He counted them in his head, a small mission to complete. 1 foot in front of the other. He was halfway there when he heard it. A faint whimper coming from the narrow alley between a coffee shop and a boarded-up convenience store. Ethan hesitated. Getting involved wasn't part of his carefully constructed routine. Routine meant safety. Deviation meant vulnerability. The whimper came again, weaker this time. Something tugged at him. A memory of the boy in Kandahar, the one they couldn't save. Different circumstances, different world, but the same helpless sound. "Damn it," he whispered, turning into the alley. At first, he saw nothing in the shadows. Then a slight movement caught his eye. A mass of dirty, matted fur partially hidden behind a dumpster. As Ethan approached, the creature tried to retreat further, dragging its hind leg at an unnatural angle. It was a dog, medium-sized, mostly brown with patches of white showing through the grime. The animal looked up at him with eyes that reflected something Ethan recognized all too well. Pain mixed with distrust of the world. "Hatum." "Hey there," Ethan said softly, crouching down but keeping his distance. "You're in rough shape, buddy." The dog's ribs showed through its dirty coat. No collar. 1 leg clearly broken. A survivor like him, but running out of luck. Ethan checked his watch. If he left now, he could still make it to work on time. The dog watched him, shivering in the December cold, expecting nothing from a world that had already shown it cruelty. Something cracked open inside Ethan's chest, a small fissure in the wall he'd built around himself. "I guess we're both going to be late today," he murmured, slowly removing his scarf. With gentle movements that belied his size, he wrapped it around the trembling animal. The dog growled weakly but didn't bite as Ethan carefully lifted him, mindful of the injured leg. "I've got you," he whispered, feeling the rapid heartbeat against his chest. "I've got you now." The nearest veterinary clinic was 15 minutes in the wrong direction. Ethan called work from the sidewalk, making up an excuse about a burst pipe in his apartment. The dog remained eerily still in his arms, as if conserving what little strength remained. The bell above the clinic door jingled as Ethan shouldered his way inside, bringing with him a swirl of cold air and snowflakes that had just begun to fall. "I need help," he said to the young woman behind the reception desk. "Found him in an alley. No collar, broken leg. Probably hasn't eaten in days." The woman, her name tag read Kayla, immediately stood, her eyes widening at the sight of the animal in his arms. "Doctor, Chen is with another patient, but let me get you into room 2. We'll need to fill out some paperwork." "I'm not the owner," Ethan interrupted. "Just found him. Maybe you can call animal control or whatever the procedure is." Kayla's expression shifted, sympathy giving way to something harder. Animal control is overrun this time of year. This time of year with his injuries? She let the implication hang in the air. Ethan tightened his hold on the dog. "I'm just saying, I can't..." The words stuck in his throat as the dog turned its muzzle slightly, pressing against his chest as if seeking warmth. "Just the basic intake forms for now," Kayla said gently. "We'll figure out the next steps after Doctor Chen examines him." Ethan found himself nodding, following her into an examination room that smelled of antiseptic and something faintly floral. As he carefully placed the dog on the metal table, the animal whimpered again, trying to stay close to the human warmth. "It's okay," Ethan found himself saying, "They're going to help you here." His hand, almost of its own volition, gently stroked the dirty fur. The dog's tail, limp until now, gave a single weak thump against the table. Doctor. Chen turned out to be nothing like Ethan had expected. Not the older man in a white coat he'd imagined, but a woman perhaps his own age, with intelligent eyes and a quiet confidence that immediately put him at ease. She wore deep green scrubs and had her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame her face. "I'm Dr. Olivia Chen," she said, extending her hand briefly before turning her full attention to the injured animal. "Kayla says you found him this morning?" "On my way to work," Ethan replied, stepping back to give her space. "In an alley off Commonwealth." "Doctor." Sorry. Chen's hands moved with gentle precision over the dog, who seemed to sense her intentions weren't to cause further harm. "He's severely malnourished, dehydrated," she murmured, more to herself than to Ethan. "The leg is definitely broken, but I'm more concerned about potential internal injuries. Has he vomited at all since you found him?" "No, he's barely moved." She nodded, shining a penlight into the dog's eyes. "He's in shock. We need to stabilize him before addressing the leg." She glanced up at Ethan. "You did the right thing bringing him in. Another day out there, especially with this cold front moving in." She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. Ethan understood the mathematics of survival all too well. "What happens now?" he asked. "We'll get him on fluids, pain management, run some tests. The leg will need surgery once he's stable enough." "Doctor." Chen's gaze met his. "Are you planning to take responsibility for him, or should we list him as a surrender?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He hadn't thought beyond getting the dog help. His apartment didn't allow pets. His life barely had room for his own needs, let alone a damaged animal's. "I can't," he began. The dog's eyes found his, and in that moment, something passed between them, a silent recognition between two wounded souls. "I don't know," Ethan amended. "I can't make that decision right now." "Doctor," Chen nodded, no judgment in her expression. "That's fair. Why don't you leave your contact information with Kayla? We'll update you on his condition, and you can decide later." "How much will all this cost?" Ethan asked, suddenly aware of the practicalities. His security job paid the bills, but just barely. A slight crease appeared between Dr. Chen's eyebrows. "We have some funds for strays, and I can see about getting him classified as a rescue case to reduce costs. But truthfully, his treatment won't be inexpensive." "I understand." Ethan reached for his wallet, finding his last $50. "This is what I have right now. I'll figure out the rest." "Doctor, Sir Mocking one." Chen's expression softened. "Let's get him stabilized first. The rest we can work out." She turned to prepare an IV line, adding over her shoulder, "Does he have a name?" Ethan looked down at the dog, who had somehow managed to inch closer to his hand despite his obvious pain. "Scout," he said, the name emerging from somewhere deep in his memory. His childhood dog, the one who'd seen him through his parents' divorce, through the lonely years before he enlisted. "His name is Scout." "Doctor," Chen smiled, a real smile that transformed her serious face into something that caught at Ethan's chest. "It suits him. A scout is someone brave who goes ahead to find the safe path for others." As Ethan reluctantly left the clinic an hour later, having provided his contact information and what little medical history he could infer from Scout's condition, he felt strangely lighter than he had in months. Concern for the dog created a focus outside himself, a small bridge to the world beyond his isolation. He called his supervisor again, converting his morning absence into a full personal day. Then he did something he hadn't done in the 3 years since his medical discharge. He deviated from his routine. Instead of going home to his empty apartment, he walked to the public library where he worked and headed for the reference section. By closing time, Ethan had filled a notebook with information about dog rehabilitation, training for traumatized animals, and the costs associated with pet ownership. The research felt purposeful in a way few things had since he'd returned to civilian life. It reminded him of mission planning, gathering intelligence, considering contingencies. That night, for the first time in months, Ethan slept without nightmares. Instead, he dreamed of Scout running, whole and strong, through an open field under a clear blue sky. The call came at 8:17 the next morning. "Doctor," Chen herself, her voice tired but satisfied. "Scout made it through the night," she said. "He's more resilient than I initially thought. We've stabilized him, started treatment for malnutrition and infection. The leg will need surgery, but I wanted to let you know he's fighting hard." Relief washed over Ethan, surprising in its intensity. "Thank you for calling. When can I see him?" The question emerged before he could analyze it, before he could remind himself that this wasn't his dog, wasn't his responsibility. Something in Dr. Chen's momentary silence suggested she heard the shift in his thinking. "We're keeping him sedated, but if you'd like to come by this afternoon, visiting might help. Animals can sense supportive presences, even when they're not fully conscious." "I'll be there," Ethan said, "after my shift ends at 4. The clinic looked different in the late afternoon light. Less institutional, somehow warmer. Kayla greeted him with a smile of recognition, leading him through to a recovery area where several kennels lined the wall. "Doctor, Tomon in Nacho. Chen is finishing up with another patient, but she asked me to bring you back. Scout's in the end kennel, on extra padding since he can't move much with the temporary splint." Scout lay on his side, tubes connecting him to fluids and monitoring equipment. His fur had been cleaned, revealing a coat that was primarily chocolate brown with white markings on his chest and paws. Some kind of retriever mix, Ethan guessed. The dog's eyes were closed, his breathing slow but steady. Ethan crouched beside the kennel door. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "I came back like I promised." Scout's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then finding Ethan. The tail, that honest barometer of canine emotion, gave 2 slow thumps against the bedding. "He recognizes you. Came, Doctor. Jawakindawarni watches Jawanarni." Chen's voice from behind him. "That's an excellent sign." Ethan stood, turning to face her. In the softer afternoon light, he noticed details he'd missed during the urgency of yesterday's visit. The warm brown of her eyes behind silver-framed glasses, the small freckle just beside her left eyebrow, the gentle curves beneath her professional attire. "How is he really doing?" Ethan asked, pulling his attention back to Scout. "Better than expected. Doctor, can Wasini?" Chen crouched beside him, reaching through the kennel bars to check Scout's gums with gentle fingers. His blood work showed no kidney damage, which was my biggest concern given his dehydration level. The leg is a clean break, which makes the surgical repair more straightforward. And after surgery? What then? "Doctor, amid a forces ceremony." Chen sat back on her heels, studying Ethan with unexpected intensity. "Ideally, recovery in a quiet home environment. 8 to 12 weeks of restricted movement. Physical therapy once the bone begins to heal." She paused. "Are you considering taking him?" Ethan looked back at Scout, who watched their conversation with an alertness that belied his condition. "My apartment doesn't allow pets," he said, the words hollow even to his own ears. "I see." Doctor, Chen's professionalism returned, creating a subtle distance between them. "Well, there are rescue organizations we work with, though many are at capacity this time of year." "What if—" Ethan hesitated, an idea forming that felt simultaneously reckless and more right than anything had in years. "What if I found a new apartment? One that allows dogs?" How soon could he be released? Something flickered in Dr. Chen's expression, surprise, maybe respect. "He'll need at least 3 days of post-surgical observation. The surgery itself is scheduled for tomorrow morning. So 4 days from now." Ethan calculated quickly. His lease was month to month. His possessions few enough to move without much notice. Potentially, yes. "But Mr. Morgan?" "Ethan," he corrected, suddenly wanting to hear her say his first name. "Ethan," she amended, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "This is a significant commitment you're considering. Scout will need special care, medication, follow-up appointments. He may have behavioral issues from whatever trauma he's experienced. Are you prepared for that?" The question hung between them, weighted, important. 3 years ago, before Afghanistan, Ethan would have answered confidently. Now he lived carefully, avoiding commitments, connections, anything that could be lost. But something had shifted when he'd found Scout in that alley. Some dormant part of himself had awakened. "I understand broken," Ethan said simply. "I understand needing someone to believe recovery is possible, even when you don't believe it yourself." Dr. Chen, Olivia, held his gaze, something unreadable passing through her eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "I think you do." After a moment, she added, "If you're serious about this, I can give you information on pet-friendly apartments near the clinic. We have clients who've mentioned vacancies." "Thank you. I'd appreciate that." As if sensing he was being discussed, Scout whined softly. Without thinking, Ethan reached through the kennel bars, letting the dog sniff his fingers. Scout licked them once, then rested his muzzle against Ethan's hand. "I'm coming back for you." Ethan promised quietly. We're going to figure this out together. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of activity, unlike anything Ethan had experienced since leaving the military. He found a ground-floor apartment 6 blocks from the veterinary clinic, more expensive than his current place, but with a small fenced yard that would be perfect for Scout's recovery. His savings, untouched since his discharge, would cover the security deposit and first month's rent. He visited Scout each day, before work, after work, during lunch breaks when he could manage it. He bought supplies, a dog bed, food and water bowls. A gentle leader harnessed the recovery nurse recommended for a dog learning to walk on 3 legs. He read about post-traumatic stress in canines, about patience and consistency in creating safe spaces. And somewhere amid the planning and the visits, he found himself looking forward to seeing Olivia Chen almost as much as seeing Scout. Their conversations expanded beyond Scout's medical care to cautious personal revelations, her childhood in San Francisco, his in rural Pennsylvania, her love of historical fiction, his unexpected passion for cooking that had developed during his recovery. She never asked directly about his military service or his scar, but something in her manner told him she would listen without judgment when he was ready to share those parts of himself. The day of Scout's release arrived with a light snow that transformed Boston into a quieter, softer version of itself. Ethan had taken the day off work to settle Scout into the new apartment, which he'd moved into the previous evening. All set, Olivia asked, bringing Scout into the examination room on a short leash. The dog wore a cone to prevent him from bothering the surgical site, and his rear leg was immobilized in a bright blue cast. Despite these indignities, Scout's tail wagged frantically at the sight of Ethan, his entire body wiggling with excitement. Careful, Olivia cautioned, but her warning came with a smile. He needs to stay calm for at least another week. Hey, buddy, Ethan said, crouching down to Scout's level. Ready to go home? Home. The word felt substantial in his mouth, weighty with meaning. Not just a place to sleep and shower, but somewhere with purpose, with connection. I've prepared detailed care instructions, Olivia said, handing him a folder. Medication schedules, physical therapy exercises to begin once we remove the stitches, warning signs to watch for. She hesitated, then added, and my personal cell number, in case you have questions when the clinic is closed. Ethan took the folder, his fingers brushing hers in a contact that felt deliberate on both sides. Thank you for everything. You're the one doing the hard part, she replied, taking a chance on him when others wouldn't. He took a chance on me first, Ethan said, trusting me in that alley when he had every reason not to. Something unspoken passed between them then, a current of understanding that went beyond doctor and patient's owner. Olivia broke the moment first, clearing her throat slightly. Scout's follow-up appointment is scheduled for next Tuesday at 4. Will that work with your schedule? I'll make it work, Ethan assured her, reaching for Scout's leash. The walk home was slow, Scout stopping frequently to sniff despite his injured leg. Ethan didn't rush him, understanding the dog's need to process this new chapter of his life through the sensory map only canines could fully appreciate. At the apartment, Scout hobbled from room to room, investigating each corner with methodical determination despite his fatigue. Ethan watched him explore, realizing he was seeing his new home through fresh eyes, not just as a place of refuge from his memories, but as a beginning. That night, Scout settled on his new bed beside Ethan's, the cone making soft scratching sounds against the fabric as he adjusted his position. Just as Ethan was drifting off, he felt a movement. Scout had abandoned his own bed to lie on the floor directly beside Ethan's, close enough that Ethan could hang his hand down and feel the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing. For the first time in 3 years, Ethan slept through the night without a single nightmare. The days fell into a new rhythm: medications with breakfast, gentle walks 3 times daily, exercises to keep Scout's good muscles from atrophying. Ethan found himself talking to the dog constantly, narrating his actions, sharing thoughts he'd kept locked inside for years. The explosion wasn't what broke me, he told Scout one evening as they sat together on the small back porch, watching snow drift down into the yard. It was losing Martinez and Chen, standing at their funerals, watching their families try to make sense of it. He stroked Scout's ears, finding comfort in the dog's warmth against his leg. I kept thinking it should have been me. They had people waiting for them, people who needed them. Scout looked up at him with those soulful eyes that seemed to understand human grief in ways Ethan couldn't articulate. But you needed me, Ethan continued softly. Didn't you? So maybe there was a purpose after all. Scout's follow-up appointment came with unexpected news. Olivia wanted to remove the cone, saying Scout had shown no interest in bothering his stitches. "He's healing remarkably well," she said, examining the surgical site with gentle fingers. "How is he adapting to your home?" "Better than I expected," Ethan replied. "He has some anxiety when I leave for work, but he settles quickly. No accidents in the house, no destruction. It's almost like he's afraid of doing anything that might make me change my mind about keeping him." Olivia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's common with rescue animals, especially those who've experienced abandonment. They try to be perfect at first." She glanced up, meeting his eyes. "Give him time to trust that you're not going anywhere, that he can make mistakes and still be loved." The word "loved" lingered between them, carrying echoes beyond Scout's situation. "I was wondering," Ethan said, the words emerging before he could second-guess himself, "if you might want to come by sometime to check on Scout outside the clinic. Maybe stay for dinner? I make a decent pasta primavera." Olivia's hand stilled on Scout's leg. For a moment, Ethan feared he'd misread the subtle current that had been building between them over the past weeks. Then she smiled, that genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "I'd like that, and I happen to know Scout would benefit from a home visit to assess his living environment." Her eyes held a teasing warmth. "Purely professional, of course." "Of course," Ethan agreed, feeling a smile spread across his own face. "Unfamiliar but welcome. How's Friday?" "Around 7? Friday would be perfect." The apartment had never received such thorough cleaning as it did in preparation for Olivia's visit. Ethan changed the sheets on his bed. Not that he expected her to see his bedroom, but the possibility hovered at the edges of his consciousness, both thrilling and terrifying. Scout watched the preparations with evident amusement, his head tilted as Ethan fussed over place settings and wine selection. "Don't look at me like that," Ethan told him, adjusting the throw pillows on the couch for the third time. "This is important." Scout's expression seemed to say he was well aware of exactly how important this was to his human. The knock came at precisely 7 o'clock. Scout, who had been dozing on his bed, immediately scrambled up, his tail wagging so hard his entire rear end swayed despite the cast. "Easy," Ethan cautioned, smoothing his shirt one last time before opening the door. Olivia stood on the threshold, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a deep blue sweater that made her eyes seem even warmer. In one hand she held a bottle of wine, in the other a small paper bag. "Hi," she said, suddenly seeming as nervous as Ethan felt. "Hi," he echoed, stepping back to let her in. "Cussa, come in." "Please." Scout had no such hesitation. He hobbled forward, greeting Olivia with enthusiastic whines as if she were a long-lost friend rather than his doctor. "Hello to you too," she laughed, crouching down to accept his affection. "Someone's feeling better." She handed the wine to Ethan, then reached into the paper bag. "I brought him a little something, nothing that will interfere with his diet." It was a soft plush toy, a small brown dog that bore a striking resemblance to Scout himself. Scout sniffed it curiously, then gently took it in his mouth, carrying it to his bed with surprising delicacy. "I think it's a hit," Ethan said, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Thank you." "It's nothing," Olivia replied, straightening up and suddenly seeming aware of their proximity in the narrow entryway. "Your apartment is lovely." "It's still pretty bare," Ethan admitted, leading her into the combined living and dining area. "I haven't accumulated much since coming back to civilian life. Kept expecting to move on, I guess." "And now?" Olivia asked, her question encompassing more than just his living situation. Ethan glanced at Scout, who had settled on his bed, the toy tucked protectively under one paw. "Now I'm putting down roots. For both of us." The evening unfolded with surprising ease. The initial nervousness melted into comfortable conversation over pasta and wine. Ethan found himself sharing stories from his childhood, from his early Army days before deployment. Lighter memories he'd almost forgotten existed. Olivia spoke of her journey to veterinary medicine, her parents' initial disappointment that she hadn't chosen to become a real doctor for people. "They came around eventually," she said, accepting a second glass of wine. "Especially when I pointed out that my patients never lie about following medical advice, and they're always genuinely happy to see me." "I can understand that," Ethan said, glancing at Scout, who had hobbled over to lie beside Olivia's chair, clearly smitten. "There's something honest about animals. No hidden agendas." "Unlike people?" Olivia asked, her perceptiveness catching him off guard. Ethan considered his response carefully. "When I first got back, I couldn't handle the questions. The sympathy, the discomfort when I couldn't be the person they remembered. And now I'm learning to be whoever this version of me is." Ethan said, surprising himself with his own honesty. The before and after aren't as separate as they once were. Olivia nodded, her expression open and unrehearsed. I think that's how healing actually works. Not going back to who you were, but integrating what happened into who you're becoming. Later, after they'd moved to the couch with cups of coffee, Scout stretched out contentedly across both their laps. Ethan found himself telling her about Afghanistan, about the ambush, about Martinez and Chen, about waking up in Germany with half his unit gone and his body held together with titanium and surgical thread. Olivia listened without interruption, one hand resting lightly on his forearm, her touch an anchor as he navigated the difficult waters of his memories. After I was discharged, I couldn't see the point anymore, he concluded quietly. Not in a way that felt dangerous, just empty. Going through the motions because that's what was expected. And now? Olivia asked again, the question becoming a refrain between them, an invitation to acknowledge change. Ethan looked down at Scout, then at Olivia's hand on his arm, then up to meet her eyes. Now I have responsibilities, connections, reasons to be present. Something shifted between them in that moment. A barrier dissolving, a distance closed. Olivia's hand moved from his arm to his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek, tracing the scar there with acceptance rather than curiosity or pity. I'm glad, she whispered. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been before. A place he'd been traveling toward his whole life without knowing it. Scout's recovery progress continued steadily through the winter months. January brought the removal of his cast, replaced by a lighter brace. February saw the beginning of more active physical therapy. Underwater treadmill sessions at Olivia's clinic. Carefully monitored play sessions with other recovering dogs. And through it all, the relationship between Ethan and Olivia deepened. Movie nights that ended with her staying over, Sunday mornings cooking breakfast together while Scout supervised from his bed, long walks through snow-covered parks as Scout's mobility improved. Ethan found himself laughing more, sleeping better. The tremor in his hands diminished. The hypervigilance that had kept him isolated for so long began to ease, replaced by a growing capacity for joy, for connection. He's ready for the brace to come off completely, Olivia announced one March evening during Scout's therapy session at the clinic. The bone has healed beautifully, and his muscle tone is almost balanced between the injured and uninjured legs. Ethan knelt beside Scout in the rehabilitation room, rubbing the dog's ears. Hear that, buddy? You're officially bionic. Scout responded with his typical enthusiasm, licking Ethan's face before turning the same affection toward Olivia, who laughed as she tried to shield herself from his tongue. As your doctor, I should maintain professional distance, she told Scout, failing entirely to do so as she accepted his sloppy kisses. As your future stepmother, however, she stopped abruptly, color rising in her cheeks as she realized what she'd said. Ethan felt something catch in his chest. Not panic, as it might have once been, but a spreading warmth. You know, he said conversationally, Scout has been wondering when you're going to officially move in. All your clothes are at our place anyway, and you haven't slept at your apartment in 3 weeks. Olivia looked at him, her expression cautious but hopeful. Is that Scout wondering or you? But both of us, Ethan admitted. We've been talking about it extensively while you're at work. Have you now? The smile was returning to her face, brighter than before. Scout is very insightful for a quadruped. He pointed out that life is too short to waste time when you know what you want. Ethan took her hand, suddenly serious. And I know what I want, Olivia. Who I want? If you're ready for that, I've been ready, she said softly. I was just waiting for you both to catch up. That night, as they lay together in what was now undeniably their bed, Scout snoring softly from his own bed beside them, Ethan traced lazy patterns on Olivia's bare shoulder. I never thought I'd have this again, he confessed. Connection. Purpose. Hope for something beyond just getting through another day. Olivia propped herself up on one elbow, her hair falling like a curtain around them. You know what amazes me? How much of life can change because of one decision. If you hadn't turned down that alley that morning, if you hadn't been working that day, Ethan continued. If Scout hadn't survived those first cold nights, they both looked over at the sleeping dog, his chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm, the once broken leg now tucked securely beneath him. An ex-soldier helped an injured dog, not knowing it would lead him to his soulmate, Ethan murmured, pulling Olivia closer. Turns out some detours take you exactly where you need to go. As spring melted into summer, Scout's limp became barely perceptible. The three of them settled into a rhythm of shared life. Weekend hikes in the mountains north of the city, Lazy evenings in the small yard that Scout had claimed as his kingdom, dinner parties with friends from the clinic, and Ethan's fellow security staff from the library. On a warm evening in June, they sat together on a blanket in the public garden, watching fireflies rise from the grass as twilight deepened around them. Scout lay beside them, contentedly chewing the same plush toy Olivia had brought on their first dinner together, now well-loved and missing an ear. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. "For both of you, actually." He pulled out 2 small boxes. The first, opened for Scout, contained a new collar with a shiny tag that read Scout Morgan Chen. The second, held toward Olivia with slightly trembling fingers, contained a simple diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "I thought it was time to make our family official," Ethan said softly. "If you'll have us." Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she looked from the ring to Scout's new collar to Ethan's face. "Yes," she whispered, "to both of you. Always yes." As Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, Scout nudged his way between them, tail wagging furiously, as if to seal the agreement with his own approval. Later that night, standing in the doorway of their bedroom watching Olivia and Scout both sleeping peacefully, Ethan felt the final pieces of his fragmented self settling into place. Not the man he had been before Afghanistan, not the broken soldier who had returned, but someone new, shaped by both, limited by neither. A quiet gratitude filled him, for wrong turns and alleyways, for injured legs and second chances, for the courage to help a wounded creature, and in doing so, find healing for himself. An ex-soldier had helped an injured dog, not knowing it would lead him to his soulmate. But perhaps in some deeper way he had known. Perhaps some part of him had recognized that in reaching out to heal another's brokenness, he would find his own path home.